How are the passengers doing?
I won't deceive you, Mr. Stryker. We're running out of time.
Surely there must be something you can do.
I'm doing everything I can. And stop calling me Shirley.
You guessed it, we're going to be talking planers today. Let's get into it. Oh hey, welcome to Flynndogg Woodwork. So one of the best upgrades that I've made to my shop is a helical head planer. The problem is these things are expensive, but I may have found one for a reasonable price that we need to take a look at. So let's take a look at this planer in today's Tool Tech Talk. So I've had a lot of experience with different types of planers, including flat knife planers as well as helical cutterhead planers. And if you've never seen the finish that you get with a helical cutterhead blade, you'll be completely amazed. But the problem is you're going to pay an arm and a leg for these planers. In fact, some of the helical cutterhead blades are as expensive as the planer itself. And because of this, the first time I tried to introduce a helical cutterhead into my shop was when I bought an aftermarket helical cutterhead for about $500, and I tried to install it myself on my DeWalt 735. And I got it installed and it worked great, but the problem was it was a pain in the ass to get that thing installed. And because of this, I think there's some real value to purchasing your planers and your jointers with the helical cutterheads already installed. But as I said earlier, pre-installed helical cutterheads on planers are expensive. In fact, the cheapest one that I've been able to find by a reputable brand is about $800. And that's actually a decent price for that planer, as I paid well over $1,600 for mine. But if you know me, I entered the bowels of the interwebs and I found one that's less than $700. And that's the one we're going to take a look at today. And not only are we going to check this planer out, but we're also going to compare it to that $1,600 planer as well as a $350 flat knife planer. So let's get into it. So this is the 13-inch FindBuyTool thickness planer. Let's check it out. So inside the box, you're going to get the 13-inch planer with the helical cutterhead already installed. There is some minor assembly required, so let's go over some of the accessories that came in the box. And this is something that I love to see whenever I open a box for a new tool, and that's very few parts that we have to attach. As you can see, it comes with the instructions as well as the height adjustment knob. You can also see it comes with some hardware as well as 5 extra blades, 2 Allen keys, as well as a dust collection chute that not only can attach to a shop vac but also a 4-inch hose. First off, we'll attach the height adjustment lever with the included screw and locking washers. Before we move on to the next step, which is to install the dust collection chute, let's take a look at how we can switch out the blades. And this is probably one of the most easily accessible access to any planer blade I've ever seen. All you do is unscrew these 2 knobs on the back and remove the cover to expose all the blades. And this helical cutterhead has 40 blades. Let's take a closer look at them. Each one of these blades has 4 sides and are easily rotated and switched out with the included tool. When changing out the blades, the cutterhead is automatically locked, and in order to rotate it, you simply push down on this tab and rotate the blade. But let's put that blade cover back on by replacing it and screwing it back into place with the 2 knobs. Now that we have the blade cover on, we can hook the dust collection chute right on top of that blade cover and install it with the 2 screws on the bottom. And believe it or not, that's it for assembly. The only thing left to do is to calibrate this tool so that we can do some testing. To calibrate the tool, we're going to need a level or a framing square to make sure that the infeed and the outfeed table are completely flat and level with the cutting surface. And hopefully you can see we've got just a little bit of work to do. To do this, we're simply going to flip up either the infeed or the outfeed table to reveal some of the leveling feet. And this is when I discovered this tool's actually got a lock to keep the table upright while you make adjustments. And to flatten out the table, you can use a 10mm wrench to make micro adjustments to the infeed and the outfeed table. Now that everything's calibrated, let's take a look at some of the product features of this planer. First off, you'll notice that there's 2 handles on either side, which is a must for any benchtop planer. Above that is the depth adjustment knob that changes the planer height a 1/64 of an inch with every quarter turn. On the right-hand side of the infeed, you'll find the height readout of the planer not only in imperial, but also metric. On the left-hand side of the tool, you're going to find a depth stop, which is something that you usually don't find in planers at this price point. And you can set this step stop to 0, 1/4 of an inch, 1/2 of an inch, 3/4 of an inch, or 1 inch. To adjust this, you simply turn the knob on the bottom and change it to your preferred setting. To the right of that depth stop, you're going to find the on and off switch, which also has a safety lock. And the last feature that I want to show you is something that I've never seen on any other planer, and it's pretty interesting. Let's take a look at it. If we look inside the planer, you can see there's a little handle here, and this is a planer headlock. Let me show you how it works. If we look on both sides of the planer, you can see there's a little rubber foot, and if we pull out on the headlock handle, you can see that that rubber foot engages with the planer column. This gives you a little extra support for your planer blade height and locks it into place. And once you're ready to change your height, you simply push the handle forward and the brake disengages. Now that we've covered the features that I want to show you with this tool, let's go over a couple of specs before we go on to testing. And luckily enough, all these specs are listed right on the front of the tool next to the circuit breaker. Now, we already mentioned that this tool has a width capacity of 13 inches, but it also has a height cut capacity of 6 1/4 inches all the way down to 1/16 of an inch. So now that we've taken a tour of this tool, let's get into some testing. Before we do that, let's take a look at some of the competition we'll be comparing this tool to. And here's a look at all three planers together. Let's first dig into the Craftsman, which was my very first planer. Now, she may look kind of nasty, but that just means she's gotten a lot of love over the years. I've just put some fresh, straight blades on this planer, so it'll be ready to go. And the Craftsman retails for about $350, just so you have an idea of some of the cost comparisons. The next planer we're going to use for comparisons is my primary planer. This is a DeWalt 735. But it's no ordinary DeWalt, as it's been upgraded with a Bird Tool Shelix Cutterhead. And here's a look at that Shelix Cutterhead just so that you have an idea of what it looks like. And I bought this DeWalt planer pre-installed with that Bird Shelix Cutterhead for well over $1,600. And to make everything even, I rotated all the blades on the Shelix so that we're dealing with fresh edges. So there's 5 tests that I want to try out with these planers. Here I've cut out 3 pieces of walnut, all from the same board. The first thing that I want to test is Snipe. Now, each one of these pieces of wood are 32 inches long, and I face jointed one side so that we can plane the opposite side. After flipping the boards around, I'll mark them on the opposite side so that we know we're getting an even cut across the board. Now let's take those boards, put them through the planers, and compare the Snipe. So the first planer we'll use is the FindBuyTool. And after a few edges, I was finally able to get a smooth side. After that, I fired up the Craftsman. Last up in our Snipe test is the DeWalt. So the results of this test really don't surprise me in the slightest, as both the DeWalt and FindBuyTool had 0 Snipe, but the Craftsman did in fact have some Snipe. Here are the results of the FindBuyTool as well as the DeWalt, and as you can see, there's 0 Snipe. If we look at the Craftsman, however, you can see the Snipe that occurred on the end of the board. The next comparison that I want to make is the feel and finish of the wood, and there's 2 clear-cut winners with the helical cutterheads. Now, if you have a DeWalt 735, you know that there's 2 settings you can have with that planer, either the dimensional setting or the finishing setting. But here's the interesting thing, the FindBuyTool finish much more resembles the finish setting on the DeWalt versus the dimensional setting, and that finishing setting is the smoother setting. The next comparison that I'd like to show you is dust collection. And we're really only going to compare the FindBuyTool to the Craftsman, as I have my DeWalt hooked up to my dust collection system, and I know that Craftsman works very similar to the DeWalt. And for both of these, I obviously used a rigid shop vac. And I'll have to say the dust collection using a shop vac was quite comparable. The only discernible difference was I saw more leakage from the Craftsman in front of the planer, while the FindBuyTool had more in the back. The next test that I'd like to do is to get a decibel readout of all 3 of these planers while they're idle. So we'll start off with the FindBuyTool planer, and it comes in at about 105 to 106 decibels. Next is the Craftsman with a very comparable 105 decibels. And finally the DeWalt with 104 to 105 decibels. So really no significant difference between all 3 planers while they're idle. Now let's take a piece of wood and do the same test, taking off a 1/64 of an inch of wood. And to do this, I'm going to have no dust collection to interfere with the reading. And here you can see the FindBuyTool comes in at about 106 to 109 decibels. And here you can see the Craftsman coming in at about 113 to 114 decibels. And our last planer, the DeWalt, comes in at 100 decibels once it's cutting wood. And this actually confirms a suspicion of mine, as it's actually quieter cutting through wood than it is idle. Well, I think these results kind of speak for themselves, as I don't see any major differences between the helical cutter heads between DeWalt and FindBuyTools. And this is great news, as far as I can tell, this is one of the cheapest helical cutter head planers on the market today, if not the cheapest. But just like with all tools, time will tell with this planer, but I do think it's a great option to get into a helical planer at this price point. As I sure as heck wish I would have known about this brand before spending almost $1,000 more on this DeWalt with the upgrade of the Shelix Cutterhead. Well, I really appreciate you joining me today on checking out these planers on today's Tool Tech Talk. If you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and leave a comment. It really does help out this small woodworking channel. Until next time, take care as always.